Content warning. This video contains disturbing real-life horror stories involving home intrusion, stalking, and predatory behavior. May be inappropriate for viewers under 18 or those sensitive to fear-inducing content. If you are under 18 or easily frightened, please do not watch. The back door. Some nights stay with you forever, not because of what happened in a dream, but because of what happened when you were wide awake, standing in your own home, realizing the walls you trusted to keep you safe were doing nothing of the sort. I was 14 years old. My brother Marcus was 15. Our parents had gone out to a dinner party that Friday night, one of those adult gatherings that seemed to last forever, and they'd left us home with the usual list of rules. Don't answer the door. Don't leave the house. Don't do anything stupid. Standard stuff. We lived in a mid-sized colonial home in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where everyone mows their lawn on Saturday mornings and waves politely from driveways. The kind of neighborhood where you never expect anything bad to actually happen. Our house had this strange acoustic quality. Sound traveled through it like the walls were hollow. You could be upstairs in your bedroom with the door closed and still hear someone talking in the kitchen. You could hear the television from the basement 2 floors up. It was just the way the house was built, and we'd gotten used to it over the years. That night, that quality would save our lives. Marcus and I were both in our rooms doing our own things. I was on my laptop. He was probably playing video games. The house was quiet the way it gets when parents aren't home. A particular kind of stillness that feels both freeing and a little unsettling at the same time. Then I heard it. A tapping. Soft, rhythmic, deliberate, coming from downstairs. My first thought was that it was Marcus messing around. He had a habit of finding new ways to annoy me, and a mysterious tapping sound from the first floor seemed exactly like something he'd do. I pulled out one earbud and listened more carefully. The sound was coming from the back of the house, from the direction of the sliding glass door that opened into our backyard. I figured Marcus had slipped outside for some reason and was knocking to be let back in. Our back door had one of those screen storm windows that you could push open to speak through without actually unlocking the door, like a built-in intercom. I headed downstairs, not thinking much of it, padding across the hardwood floors in my socks. The den was dark. We never left lights on in rooms we weren't using, another house rule. The only light came from the faint orange glow of the street lamps filtering through the curtains. I crossed the room and looked toward the glass door. I couldn't see anything clearly. The outside light was off, and the backyard beyond the glass was just a wall of shadows. I reached over and flipped the outside porch light switch, and I wish I hadn't. Standing on the other side of the door was a man I had never seen before in my life. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with long, dark hair that fell to his shoulders and a beard going gray at the edges. His cheeks were red, like he'd been out in the cold for a while. He wore a flannel jacket that was too light for the temperature. He was standing close to the door, closer than anyone standing in your backyard at night has any right to be, and he was looking directly at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. My legs told me to run. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around and go upstairs and lock myself in the bathroom. But something about the man's expression stopped me. He didn't look threatening exactly. He looked desperate. He held his hands up slightly, palms out, like he was showing me he wasn't carrying anything. He tilted his head toward the screen section of the door. Against everything I know now, against everything any adult would have told me to do, I pushed the screen panel open a crack so he could speak. "I just need to use a phone," he said. His voice was low and rough. "Please, it's an emergency." "Why are you in our backyard?" I asked. He didn't answer that. "Please," he said again. "I just need to make one call. Let me in for 1 minute." "I can't let you in," I said. "I'm sorry. You need to leave or I'm calling the police." I reached up to slide the screen panel closed again. His arm came through the gap before I could. It happened so fast. One moment I was reaching for the panel. The next, his forearm was wedged into the opening, his hand groping toward the interior latch of the door. He wasn't asking anymore. He was trying to get inside. I screamed for Marcus. The moment my voice broke the silence, the man yanked his arm back like he'd been burned. I heard him step back from the door. I didn't wait to see anything else. I spun around and ran for the stairs, nearly colliding with Marcus, who was already halfway down. "There's a man outside," I said, or something like that. I was shaking too hard to be sure the words came out right. Marcus leaned around the doorway to the den and looked toward the back door. The porch light was still on. The man was still standing there, not running, not leaving, just standing there, watching the house. Marcus called our parents. They told us to call 911 immediately and to stay upstairs. We did both. We locked ourselves in Marcus's room, which was farther from the stairs, and sat on his bed listening. For a while there was nothing. No tapping, no sounds from below. Just the house settling and the faint noise of our own breathing. After maybe 20 minutes, I made a mistake. I told myself it was courage. Looking back, it was just being 14 and not fully understanding what danger actually feels like when it hasn't fully arrived yet. Marcus tried to stop me, but I slipped out and went back downstairs. The den was empty. The back door was still closed. The man was no longer visible through the glass. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And then I noticed the screen panel. It was lower than I'd left it. I hadn't pushed it back up. I'd been too panicked. But I also hadn't left it that far open. Someone had pushed it further down from the outside. I took a step toward the door. Then I looked to my left. The door to our home office, which shared a wall with the den, was open. I was certain, absolutely certain, it had been closed when I came downstairs. My father always closed it. It was a habit. That door was never left open. The inside of the office was completely dark. I stood there frozen, logic and terror arm wrestling in my chest. Everything in me said to go back upstairs. But my feet weren't moving. My brain made one of those snap decisions that you can never fully explain afterward. It wanted information before it would agree to be afraid. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, turned on the flash, held it up toward the open office doorway, and pressed the button. The flash was blinding in the dark room. In the single frozen frame of that photograph, caught in stark white light, I saw the man. He was hunched over my father's desk, his body angled toward what? Both hands braced against the surface, and his head was turned. He was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. I don't remember deciding to run. I don't remember my feet hitting the stairs. I don't remember anything between that flash of white light and the sensation of throwing myself through Marcus's bedroom door and twisting the lock behind me. Then came the tapping again. Only this time it wasn't from the back door. It was from the other side of Marcus's bedroom door, right in front of us. 3 slow, quiet knocks. And then the man's voice, low and almost gentle, coming through the wood. "Hey, come on. Open up. I'm not gonna hurt you." Marcus grabbed my arm and I grabbed his, and we both pressed back against the far wall and didn't say anything. Then I heard myself shout, before I'd even decided to, "The cops are already here. They're downstairs right now." Silence. A long, stretching silence. Then footsteps, retreating down the hall, down the stairs. A long pause. Then the sound of the back door opening and closing. Nothing after that. The police arrived roughly 5 minutes later. They searched the house and the yard. They found no one. The office showed signs that someone had been in there. A chair moved, a drawer not fully closed, but nothing taken. No fingerprints recovered. The man was never identified. I've thought about that night 1,000 times since. About the photograph I took. About what would have happened if I hadn't shouted when I did. About those 5 minutes the police hadn't yet arrived, while we sat in that locked room listening to him breathe on the other side of the door. The photo is still on an old phone, somewhere in a box in my closet. I've never looked at it again. The hunting cabin. There's something that happens to sound in the deep woods at night that doesn't happen anywhere else. In a city, silence is never really silence. There's always traffic, voices, the low hum of infrastructure. Even in the suburbs, there's enough ambient noise that the world feels inhabited. But out in the genuine wilderness, in the places where roads turn to gravel, and then to dirt, and then to nothing, the silence is a different thing entirely. It has weight, it has texture, and when something breaks it, you feel it in your teeth. My name is Cliff. I'm telling this story the way my father told it to me, the way he told everyone who would sit still long enough to listen, for the rest of his life, after it happened. My father, I'll call him by the name everyone used, which was Dale, was an avid hunter. He'd been doing it since he was a kid, raised by a grandfather who believed that knowing how to feed yourself from the land was as important as any education. He was good at it, patient, precise, knowledgeable about animal behavior in a way that came from decades of quiet observation. For him, hunting wasn't really about the kill. It was about the woods, about going somewhere that required you to be completely present. His girlfriend's younger brother, Adam, had been asking for months to go on a proper hunting trip. He'd grown up in the city and had this romanticized idea of what hunting was. The orange vests, the crisp air, the meditative stillness of sitting in a blind and waiting. Dale decided to take him seriously. He wanted to show the kid a real experience, which meant taking him somewhere with actual deer, not a managed preserve where success was practically guaranteed. He called his uncle Raymond, who owned a large piece of land in a remote part of West Virginia, Braxton County if you know the area. Rolling hills, dense hardwood forest, a creek that ran cold even in August. Raymond had hunted it for 30 years and knew every trail, every deer run, every good spot for a blind. He told Dale to come on out, that he had a cabin on the far end of the property they could use for the weekend. Dale and Adam loaded up the truck on a Thursday evening and made the drive. By the time they turned off the last county road and started following Raymond's handwritten directions down a series of increasingly narrow dirt tracks, it was nearly 9 o'clock and full dark. Raymond was waiting for them at the main house, a farmhouse-style place at the entrance to the property. He seemed pleased to see them, offered coffee, and within 20 minutes had them back in his own truck for the drive out to the cabin. About 10 miles, he said. Maybe 15. He drove quickly like a man who'd made the trip so many times he could do it in his sleep, which, for all Dale knew, he probably could. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was underwhelming. That was the kindest word Dale ever used for it. 2 small rooms, a main space with a wood stove and a table and 2 cots, and a back room with a few shelves and a second cot. No electricity, no running water beyond a hand pump connected to a buried cistern. The windows were single pane and original to the structure, which looked like it dated to sometime in the early 20th century. There were no curtains, no blinds, just glass and whatever was on the other side of it. Raymond helped them carry in their gear, chatted for a few minutes about where he'd been seeing deer lately, and then said goodnight. His truck lights swept across the tree line as he turned around, and then the sound of his engine faded, and then there was nothing but the silence of the woods. Dale and Adam ate some sandwiches they'd packed, talked through the plan for the next morning, and got ready for bed. That's when they realized they didn't love the windows. Being in a lit cabin interior with unobstructed windows looking out into full darkness creates a particular psychological unease that's hard to articulate if you haven't felt it. You can see nothing outside, but whatever is outside can see everything inside. You're lit up like an aquarium. Dale and Adam weren't the type to talk about that feeling directly, but they both felt it. And by unspoken agreement, they started hanging spare clothing over the windows, flannel shirts draped over the rods, a jacket bunched against the lower pane. Not a perfect solution, but enough to break the sense of being completely exposed. They turned the lanterns low and settled in. Dale was nearly asleep when the noise started. It came from the tree line, a rhythmic, hollow clanging, like someone dragging a length of chain against a metal barrel or like two large trash cans being smashed together repeatedly. It was loud enough to echo, loud enough that it seemed to reverberate off the cabin walls. Adam sat up immediately. "What is that?" "Probably a bear," Dale said without moving. "They get into things. Go to sleep." "That doesn't sound like a bear. Bears are big. They make a lot of noise. Go to sleep." The clanging went on for another few minutes, then stopped. Dale drifted back toward sleep. Adam, from his cot on the other side of the room, apparently did too, because the cabin was quiet for what felt like a couple of hours. Then Adam's hand landed on Dale's shoulder, shaking him awake. "Cliff," he was using Dale's real name, which I've changed, "there's someone outside." "There's not. I can hear them." Dale opened his eyes and listened. He heard nothing. The woods had that particular late-night silence, deep and absolute. "You're dreaming," he said. "Go back to sleep. Don't wake me unless the cabin's actually on fire." He closed his eyes, and then he heard it. It started at the corner of the cabin nearest Adam's cot, a slow, dragging sound, like nails being drawn deliberately across old wood. Long, unhurried strokes, scraping from one end of the exterior wall to the other, then pausing, then continuing. Whatever was making the sound was moving along the outside of the cabin, working its way from the back wall toward the far window. Then the window tapping began. 3 knocks, evenly spaced on the pane closest to Adam's head. Both men were completely still. Neither spoke. Dale's hand found his rifle in the dark, more from muscle memory than conscious decision. He heard Adam doing the same with his. "Load it," Dale said quietly. "It's already loaded," Adam said. They stayed that way until dawn, sitting up, rifles across their laps, listening to the woods and watching the covered windows for shadows. Nothing came through the door. Nothing tried the latch. But at various points through the night they heard the scraping resume along different walls, and twice more the tapping came at different windows, always evenly spaced, always exactly 3 knocks, always followed by silence. When the first gray light started coming through the gaps in the clothing over the windows, Dale built up the wood stove, made coffee, and didn't say much. They packed their gear as soon as it was fully light and drove out without hunting at all. Back at the main house, Raymond was already up, working on something in the barn. Dale asked him directly, had he sent anyone out to check on them in the night? A neighbor, maybe, or a farmhand who might not have known they were there. Raymond looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read. "Nobody goes out to that cabin," he said. "Nobody but me, and I was here all night." Dale described what they'd heard. Raymond listened, nodded slowly, and said nothing useful. He didn't look frightened. He didn't look surprised exactly. He looked like a man choosing how much to say. "Animals do strange things out here," he said finally. "You're fine. You made it to morning." Dale never went back to that property. He never asked Raymond what he thought was actually out there, because some part of him understood that Raymond's answer wouldn't make him feel better. The last thing I'll tell you is this. Before Raymond left them alone that first night, he took a photograph of them standing in front of the cabin. It was a wide shot, meant to capture the whole structure. Dale kept that photo. If you look at the tree line in the background of that picture, at the edge where the forest begins and the darkness starts to swallow the light, there is a shape that doesn't belong there. Raymond took that photo before they were alone. The motel. Let me tell you something about the kind of place I'm describing before I tell you what happened there, because context matters, and because I want you to understand exactly what it feels like to be 19 years old and working a job like this one. The motel was called something generic, the kind of name that sounds like 100 other motels in 100 other states, a name that promises rest and delivers something considerably less. It sat off a state highway outside a mid-sized town in rural Georgia, wedged between a closed auto parts store and a truck stop that did brisk business at all hours. It had 2 long concrete buildings, exterior corridors, and a parking lot that was never fully lit. The vacancy sign had letters missing. The pool had been drained years before I got there and never refilled. I'm gonna call myself by a name that isn't mine. Call me Lauren. I was 19, living with a roommate, working 2 jobs to pay for community college. The motel job was nights and weekends, desk shifts, checking in guests, and housekeeper shifts, cleaning rooms. The pay wasn't great, but it was reliable, and I needed reliable. The guests were, by and large, exactly what you'd expect at a place like that. Long-haul truckers who needed a few hours of sleep. Couples who didn't want to be seen. People paying cash. People who paid for 1 night and stayed 3. People who left rooms in conditions I still don't fully want to describe. The police came through the parking lot often enough that I knew 2 of the officers by name. I had learned early on to keep my head down, do my work quickly, and not get curious about who was in which room or why. Building 2 was the problem building. It sat at the far end of the property, separated from the office by the length of Building 1 and a stretch of cracked asphalt. The rooms in Building 2 were the most worn down, the most neglected, the ones with the rattling air conditioners and the carpets that had seen too many years. They were also, most of the time, the least occupied. Long stretches of Building 2 were simply vacant, doors locked, rooms untouched, quiet in a way that amplified every small sound. I hated working over there alone. I'd mentioned it to my manager once, and he'd looked at me with the kind of exhaustion that comes from managing an underfunded property, short-staffed, and said something like, "Yeah, it's not ideal, just get through it." So I did. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, I was finishing up the last few rooms in Building 2. It was around 4 o'clock, the light outside already starting to go amber. I had my cart in the corridor, and I was working through the rooms in sequence, strip the bed, wipe down surfaces, clean the bathroom, move on. I wanted to be done before dark. I always wanted to be done before dark in Building 2. I was cleaning the mirror in room 214. It was a big mirror, full width above the dresser, and I was working across it with a spray bottle and a cloth, the way you do when you're tired and running on autopilot. Music from my phone was playing through one earbud. The other earbud was out because I always kept one ear free when I was working alone over there. That's why I heard him. Or more precisely, that's why I saw him first. In the reflection of the mirror, in the space behind me where the room stretched back toward the open doorway, a man was standing. He was in his mid-50s, I estimated, heavy through the shoulders, dark hair hanging long and unwashed, clumped like it hadn't been cared for in weeks. He had on a canvas work coat and jeans that were dirty at the knees. He was standing just inside the doorway of the room, my room, the vacant room I was cleaning, and he was watching me. I spun around and screamed. I didn't mean to. It just happened. The kind of scream that comes from your chest before your brain has processed what your eyes are seeing. The man didn't flinch. He smiled. I'm going to describe that smile carefully because it's important. It wasn't a threatening smile, and it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who is enjoying a situation at your expense, patient and pleased with itself. Sorry, I said automatically, which tells you something about the kind of service industry conditioning that was already in my bones by age 19. You scared me. My brain was running two parallel tracks. The service-trained track that was already trying to de-escalate and be professional, and the deeper track, the animal track, that was cataloging exits and distances and the fact that he was standing between me and the door. Sir, I said carefully, can I help you with something? Do you need fresh towels? He didn't answer the question. He looked at me the way you might look at something in a display case, unhurried and appraising. Then he reached into the front pocket of his work coat and produced a folded bill. He extended his hand toward me, holding it out flat, and I could see it was $100. Every alarm in my body went off at once. Nobody tips a housekeeper $100. Not at a $40 a night motel. Not at any motel. That money wasn't a tip. That money was an opening offer. I'm Terry, he said. His voice was deep and slow. There was a smell coming off him, engine oil and something sharp underneath, like cheap liquor sweated out through work. Staying next door with my wife, Sherry. He said it in a way that suggested he found the rhyme amusing. We were watching you work. He nodded toward the window. Just thought you deserved a little something. I appreciate that, sir, but I can't accept that, I said. I heard my voice come out steady and was vaguely proud of that. I have a lot of rooms to finish up. I should get back to it. Come meet Sherry, he said. Just for a minute. She wants to say hi. I can't do that, sir. I'm working. Just to talk. The smile again. Just friendly. I really can't. Thank you for the offer. He stood there for a moment that lasted much longer than a moment. Then he made a sound low in his throat, not quite a laugh, not quite a grunt, and he walked out of the room. I did not move until I could no longer hear his footsteps. Then I locked the room door from the inside. There is no wife named Sherry, I thought. I don't know why I was so certain of that, but I was. There was no wife. There was Terry, and there was whatever plan Terry had. And whatever that plan was, it was not friendly conversation. I needed to call the front desk. The room phone was on the nightstand. I picked it up and put it to my ear. No dial tone, not even static. Dead silence. I told myself it was fine. The phones in Building 2 went out all the time. Bad wiring, age, maintenance that never got done. I told myself this as I stood in a locked room in an isolated part of a half-vacant motel with a dead phone and a man named Terry somewhere in the corridor outside. My cell phone was on my cart, outside the door, 10 feet away, give or take. I opened the door. I looked both ways down the corridor. Empty. The walkway stretched in both directions under the pale, flickering light, and I couldn't see anyone. I stepped out and started going through my cart, pushing aside the cleaning supplies, looking for my phone. I'd wasted maybe 45 seconds when I made a decision. I wasn't going to find it fast enough. The front desk was 50 yards away. around the corner of Building 1, past the vending alcove, through the door. I was 19 years old, in good shape, in sneakers. I ran. I heard him the moment I cleared the corner of the building. "She's running. She's heading out." He was shouting to someone. A second voice answered, a woman's voice, and I realized with a cold clarity that I'd been wrong, not about the danger, but about the detail. There was a wife, or someone, and they had both been watching, and now they were both coming. I heard 2 sets of footsteps on the pavement behind me. I didn't look back. I hit the door to the storage room on my left. I had a key card. I'd had it out without consciously thinking about it, and I was inside and had the door locked behind me before I heard them reach that section of the walkway. I sat in that storage room in the dark for 30 minutes. I could hear them outside for the first 10. Voices, footsteps, movement along the wall, the sound of the corridor door being tested from the outside. Then nothing. Then, much later, the sound of a vehicle accelerating out of the parking lot. I waited another 10 minutes after that. When I finally reached the front desk, I was shaking so badly that my manager had to sit me down in his office chair before he could make sense of what I was telling him. He called the police. By the time the first patrol car pulled into the lot, the room registered to Terry was empty and his vehicle was gone. The officers who responded ran the name and description I gave them. One of them, a woman who was careful about how she told me this, explained that the man I had described matched someone they were familiar with. Someone with prior charges. Someone who had been accused before of exactly this kind of approach. The pretense of friendliness, the gradual escalation, the careful isolation. Someone who had been previously charged with rape. He was arrested 6 weeks later, in another state at another motel following a similar pattern. I found out through a detective who called to inform me that the case was moving forward and that I might be contacted to provide a statement. I quit the motel job on my birthday, 3 weeks after the incident. Went in, did my shift, handed in my keycard, and never went back. I've worked a lot of jobs since then. Some of them rough. Some of them in places and circumstances that required caution and awareness. But I have never, not once, gone back to working in an isolated building, alone, within reach of strangers who already know I'm there. I learned what I needed to learn at that motel in Georgia. I just wish the lesson hadn't been quite so expensive. Closing narrative and final thoughts. 3 stories. 3 ordinary situations, a teenager home alone, 2 hunters at a remote cabin, a young woman doing her job. None of these people woke up that morning thinking they were going to have a story worth telling. None of them were doing anything reckless. They were home. They were in the woods. They were at work. And yet, that's the thing about the stories that actually stay with you, not the invented ones. Not the ones built for shock value with elaborate setups and theatrical payoffs, but the real ones. The ones that happen on a regular Friday night in Ohio, or a Thursday evening in West Virginia, or a Tuesday afternoon in Georgia. The mundane ones, the ones that start with a sound you almost didn't hear. What connects these 3 accounts isn't supernatural. There's no ghost in any of them. No monster in the traditional sense. What connects them is something more unsettling, a particular type of human decision-making, the calculation that happens behind a pair of eyes, watching you from the other side of a door or a mirror or tree line, and the cold patience of someone who has made a plan and is executing it. The 14-year-old who took a photograph in a dark office didn't know what she was going to find in that flash. She was following an impulse that was equal parts terrified and brave, and the image she captured froze something in her that didn't fully unfreeze for years. The man in her father's office wasn't supernatural. He was just a man, But the particular horror of finding a man in your home, in a room you'd walked past moments before, hunched over your family's belongings, turning to look directly at the camera when the flash went off, that doesn't require any paranormal explanation to be genuinely deeply frightening. Dale and Adam in that West Virginia cabin never got an answer. Raymond's non-answer, "Animals do strange things out here," was probably the most honest thing he could have said, not because it was informative, but because it acknowledged that something happened without claiming to know what. 3 knocks on a window evenly spaced, repeated at multiple windows over the course of a single night, while something scraped steadily along the exterior walls of a structure 10 miles from the nearest neighbor. What makes that cabin story so effective is what it doesn't explain. There's no reveal. There's just the morning and the decision to leave, and the photograph with the shape at the tree line. Lauren's story is different from the other two in one important way. The threat she faced was completely identified. She knew his name. The police knew his history. He was eventually caught. In some ways, that resolution should make her story less frightening than the others. There are answers. There is closure. The predator was removed. But Lauren's account carries its own particular weight. The weight of those 30 minutes alone in the dark storage room, listening to footsteps outside the door, not knowing if the lock would hold, not knowing if anyone was coming. 5 minutes. That's how close the 14-year-old came to those 5 minutes mattering. The police arrived 5 minutes after the man left. 5 minutes during which she and her brother sat in a locked room, listening to knocking on the other side of the door. 10 miles. That's how far Dale and Adam were from Raymond's house when they realized the phones at the cabin didn't work and that whatever was outside wasn't leaving. 50 yards. That's the distance Lauren had to cover on foot with 2 people behind her in a parking lot at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. These are the measurements of fear. Not miles, not hours. Inches and seconds, and the particular arithmetic of how much time you have and how much time you need, and whether those numbers work out in your favor. If you've made it this far into these stories, there's a reason. You're drawn to them the same way people have always been drawn to cautionary tales, not out of morbidity, but out of something that functions more like preparation. We listen to these accounts because some part of our brain is filing them away, running scenarios, asking what we would do. The freeze response versus the flight response. The impulse to investigate versus the impulse to retreat. The split-second assessment of whether a stranger's face reads as desperate or predatory. These are ancient calculations. They predate civilization. They're built into the way our nervous systems process threat. And the reason stories like these persist, the reason they get passed on, from father to child, from friend to friend, from a YouTube channel to 3 million viewers at 2 in the morning, is that they activate those calculations in a safe context. You're safe right now. You're probably in a lit room, or wearing earbuds on a commute, or lying in bed with your phone. Nothing is outside your door. Nothing is tapping on your window. But somewhere, someone is home alone on a Friday night and they're about to hear a sound that doesn't belong. Somewhere, 2 people are settling in for the night in a cabin 10 miles from anyone they know, and the woods outside are about to stop being quiet. Somewhere, a young woman is cleaning a mirror, and the reflection is about to show her something she wasn't expecting to see. The stories don't end. They just change names, change locations, change the specific details of exactly how ordinary a day was before it stopped being ordinary. Stay aware. Trust the part of yourself that says something is wrong. And if you're ever alone in a building and a stranger offers you a $100 bill for no clear reason, run.